The sound of my mother's hand hitting my wife's face echoed through the dining room louder than the Christmas music. Every conversation stopped. Every fork froze halfway to someone's mouth. Even the grandchildren went silent. My wife Emily stood there with one hand against her cheek, too stunned to speak. Her eyes searched mine, not for revenge, not for permission to fight back. She was asking one simple question. Is this finally enough? Then my mother pointed toward the front door. You'll always be trailer trash, she spat. Take your daughter and get out. My 7-year-old daughter Sophie burst into tears. My sister-in-law looked down at her plate. My younger sister pretended to straighten the napkins. Dad stared into his coffee as though none of this had happened. No one defended Emily. No one told my mother to stop. 30 years of silence had taught everyone exactly how to survive her temper. I slowly stood up. Emily whispered, David. I gently took Sophie's hand. It's okay, sweetheart. Then I looked at my wife. Go get your coat. She blinked, surprised. We're leaving. Nobody expected that. My mother folded her arms. Oh, don't be so dramatic. He'll be back before dessert. I didn't answer. I helped Sophie into her winter coat while Emily silently picked up her purse. As we reached the front door, my mother laughed. You always come crawling back. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. For just a second, I almost turned around. 30 Christmases flashed through my mind. 30 years of insults. 30 years of excuses. 30 years of telling my wife just let it go. Not this time. Without another word, I opened the door. The cold Ohio air hit us like a wave. Snowflakes drifted beneath the porch light as we walked to the truck. Behind us, someone called my name. I never looked back. We drove through the quiet streets without saying much. Christmas lights glowed on front porches. Families gathered around warm fireplaces. Inside our truck, only Sophie's soft crying filled the silence. Emily finally spoke. I'm sorry. I glanced at her. For what? I ruined Christmas. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. No, she looked away. I should have kept my mouth shut. You didn't ruin anything. Neither of us said another word. Because deep down, we both knew Christmas had been broken long before that dinner. By midnight, we were back in our little house outside Columbus. Emily started folding clothes into old cardboard boxes. I carried family photo albums from the bookshelf. Sophie hugged her favorite stuffed rabbit while watching us quietly. Daddy. Yes, sweetheart. Are we moving? I knelt beside her. We're going somewhere. People are kind to your mom. She nodded with a seriousness no 7-year-old should ever have to carry. I like that. That sentence nearly broke me. Children shouldn't have to wish adults would simply be kind. Before sunrise, everything important we owned was packed into the truck. Not because we had nowhere to live, because I knew something had changed inside me. If I stayed connected to my mother's world, my daughter would grow up believing love meant enduring humiliation. I couldn't allow that. Around 8 the next morning, my phone rang. Mom. I stared at the screen. Emily looked at me. Aren't you going to answer? I took a slow breath. Then I pressed accept. The first thing I heard was my mother crying. My mother's voice trembled on the other end of the phone. David, where are you? I looked out the kitchen window at the snow covering our front yard. Home. You embarrassed this family. Not I'm sorry. Not is Emily okay? Not even how's Sophie? Those weren't the words that mattered to her. What mattered was that for the first time in her life, someone had walked away from her. I closed my eyes. Mom, did you really call to ask how your granddaughter slept after watching you slap her mother? Silence. Then she sighed, irritated. You're blowing this way out of proportion. There it was. The same sentence I'd heard my entire life. I ended the call without another word. For the first time in 62 years, I hung up on my mother. Emily was making pancakes when I walked back into the kitchen. You okay? She asked. I nodded. I think I finally am. She smiled sadly. I've been waiting a long time to hear you say that. Her words stayed with me the rest of the morning, not because they were cruel, because they were true. When I married Emily 31 years earlier, my mother had smiled through the wedding pictures. The moment the guests left, she pulled me aside. You can still back out. I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She's sweet, Mom had said, but she's not one of us. Emily had grown up in a trailer outside Chillicothe, Ohio. Her father worked construction whenever he could find jobs. Her mother cleaned motel rooms. They didn't have much money. What they did have was kindness. My parents, on the other hand, had a beautiful brick home country club memberships and an unhealthy obsession with appearances. To my mother, where you came from mattered more than who you became. The insults started small. Emily's homemade potato salad wasn't how respectable families made it. Her dress looked a little cheap. Her accent sounded too country. Every Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, birthday, and anniversary came with another little remark disguised as advice. If Emily wore jeans, you should really dress like an adult. If she dressed nicely, trying awfully hard today, aren't you? If she stayed quiet, don't pout. If she spoke, nobody asked. No matter what she did, she was wrong. I wish I could tell you I defended her every time. I didn't. Sometimes I changed the subject. Sometimes I laughed nervously. Sometimes I whispered in the car afterward. Mom doesn't mean it. Emily never argued. She'd just stare out the passenger window and quietly say, I know. Looking back, I realized she wasn't agreeing with me. She was protecting me from feeling guilty. Dad rarely spoke during these moments. He wasn't a cruel man. He was simply a tired one. After 40 years of marriage, he'd learned that disagreeing with Mom only guaranteed another fight. So he stayed silent. My younger sister copied her. My brother-in-law joked his way through uncomfortable moments. Even my sister-in-law, who had married into the family years after Emily, learned quickly that agreeing with Mom was the safest place to stand. Silence became our family's native language. Then Sophie was born. I promised myself everything would change. Surely Mom would soften once she became a grandmother. Instead, she found new ways to criticize. That little girl deserves better clothes. Emily feeds her too much sugar. I don't know where Sophie gets those manners. Every visit left Emily more exhausted. Every visit left Sophie quieter. Still, I kept asking my wife to be patient. She's getting older, I'd say. She doesn't really mean those things. One snowy evening last December, Emily looked at me across the dinner table after another difficult visit. She asked a question I couldn't answer. David, as if a stranger treated me this way, would you ever ask me to keep going back? I sat there in silence, because I already knew the answer. And somewhere deep inside me, I knew Christmas was going to force a choice I'd been avoiding for 3 decades. By the middle of December, I had almost convinced myself Christmas might pass without another disaster. Almost. The invitation arrived the way it always did, not as a question, but as an expectation. Mom called on a Tuesday afternoon. We're having Christmas dinner at 6. Your sister's bringing the ham, Linda's making dessert, and your father already bought the wine. She never asked whether we were coming. She simply assumed we would. When I didn't answer right away, she added, You'll be there. I'll talk to Emily. You don't need to talk to Emily. Her words came so quickly they sounded rehearsed. Christmas is about family. I almost laughed. If Christmas was really about family, why had my wife spent nearly every holiday fighting back tears? I'll let you know, I said. Then I ended the call. Emily was wrapping presents in the living room when I told her. She stopped folding the ribbon. I figured she'd call. I sat beside her. We don't have to go. She looked at the half-wrapped toy truck meant for our nephew. If we don't go, your mother will blame me. She blames you anyway. Emily smiled, but there wasn't much happiness behind it. That's true. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Christmas music played softly from the old radio in the kitchen. Outside, Sophie was trying to build a snowman by herself. Finally, Emily looked toward the window. I don't want Sophie growing up without grandparents. I followed her eyes. Our daughter was laughing as the snow kept falling around her. I don't either. Emily reached for my hand. Maybe this year will be different. I wanted to believe her. More than anything. Looking back now, I realize hope can sometimes be the cruelest habit. Every year we convinced ourselves things would improve. Every year we drove to my parents' house carrying gifts, desserts, and good intentions. Every year we drove home carrying disappointment. Still, people like us keep trying. Because giving up on family feels like giving up on part of yourself. Christmas morning arrived cold and bright. Emily baked her famous pecan pie before sunrise. The same pie my mother claimed was too sweet. She made it anyway. Not because Mom appreciated it. Because kindness was simply who Emily was. Sophie carefully picked out a Christmas card she'd drawn herself. On the front, she'd written in crooked second-grade handwriting, Merry Christmas, Grandma and Grandpa, love you. I stared at those words longer than I should have. Children forgive so easily. Adults often don't deserve it. We pulled into my parents' driveway just before 6. The house looked exactly as it always had. Perfect wreath. Perfect lights. Perfect front lawn. Everything looked warm from the outside. Inside, it was another story. Mom barely greeted Emily. Oh, she glanced at the pie. You brought that again. Emily smiled politely. I know Dad likes it. Mom shrugged. We'll see. Dad quietly kissed Emily on the cheek. Merry Christmas. His voice carried the apology he never knew how to say aloud. Everyone else had already arrived. My younger sister hugged Sophie. Linda, my sister-in-law, was arranging dishes in the kitchen. She smiled at Emily, though it felt forced. Dinner began peacefully enough. Football played quietly on the television. The grandchildren opened small gifts. Dad carved the turkey. For nearly 40 minutes, I thought maybe Emily had been right. Maybe this year really would be different. Then Linda looked across the table. So Emily, she smiled the kind of smile that wasn't really a smile. Are you still shopping at those discount stores? The room became strangely quiet. Emily answered calmly. I shop wherever I find good quality. Linda laughed. I guess some habits never change. Mom smiled into her wine glass. Nobody else laughed. But nobody stopped it either. I felt something tighten in my chest. It was beginning. Again. And this time, something inside me refused to look away. The silence after Linda's comment felt heavier than the snow piling up outside. Emily didn't react the way my family expected. She didn't snap. She didn't cry. She simply smiled politely and cut another slice of turkey for Sophie. I've never cared where something comes from, she said softly, only whether it lasts. Dad nodded almost imperceptibly. I'd say that's good advice. Mom shot him a look sharp enough to stop him from saying another word. Linda leaned back in her chair and laughed. Well, that's easy to say when you've never had much. Emily folded her napkin carefully. I had parents who loved me. I never considered that not much. The table fell quiet again. I was proud of her. She hadn't insulted anyone. She had simply told the truth. But truth had never sat comfortably at my mother's table. Mom set her wine glass down harder than necessary. Emily. My wife looked up. You always have to make everything about yourself. Emily blinked. I wasn't trying to. You always act like you're better than everyone else because you're so humble. Emily looked genuinely confused. I don't think I'm better than anyone. Linda shrugged dramatically. Come on, Aunt Carol. She's always pretending she's too good for nice things. Emily looked at me, not because she wanted me to defend her, because she couldn't understand how the conversation had turned against her so quickly. Neither could Sophie. Daddy, she tugged gently on my sleeve. Why's Grandma mad? I squeezed her little hand beneath the table. It's okay. But it wasn't. Not anymore. Dad cleared his throat. Let's just eat. For one hopeful second, I thought the moment might pass. Then Mom looked directly at Emily. You've been poisoning David against this family for years. Emily slowly shook her head. I've done everything I could to keep peace. Oh, please. Mom stood from her chair. We welcomed you into this family. Emily's voice remained calm. I've spent 30 years trying to be part of it. Mom laughed bitterly. You've spent 30 years pretending you belong. The room froze. My younger sister stared at her plate. My brother-in-law quietly reached for his coffee. Nobody wanted to become the next target. Emily stood up. I think Sophie and I should go home. She never got the chance. Without warning, Mom stepped around the table. Before anyone could react, she raised her hand and slapped Emily across the face. The crack echoed through the dining room. Sophie's scream followed immediately. Mommy, Emily stumbled backward, one hand against her cheek. Tears filled her eyes, not from pain, but from disbelief. Mom pointed toward the front door. You'll always be trailer trash. Every word landed like another slap. Take your daughter and get out. Nobody moved. Not one person. The only sound in the room was Sophie crying. Something inside me finally broke. Not with anger. With clarity. 30 years. And I suddenly saw my life exactly as it had been. Every excuse. Every holiday. Every apology I'd asked Emily to accept. Every time I'd chosen comfort over courage. I stood slowly. Mom looked satisfied. See, he's finally going to do the right thing. She expected me to tell Emily to apologize. Instead, I walked to my wife. I gently took her trembling hand. Then I knelt beside Sophie. Sweetheart. She threw her arms around my neck. We're going home. Emily whispered through her tears. David, your family? I looked into her eyes. No, I shook my head. You are my family. For the first time in 31 years, I said the words that should have been spoken long ago. I helped Emily into her coat. Dad finally stood. David! His voice cracked. I'm sorry. I nodded. I know, but knowing wasn't enough anymore. As we reached the front door, Mom crossed her arms. Oh, don't be ridiculous. You'll cool off. You always do. I opened the front door. The freezing December air rushed inside. Snowflakes swirled beneath the porch light. Without looking back, I said quietly, not this time. The door closed behind us. And with that single sound, 3 decades of silence finally came to an end. The drive home felt different from every other drive we'd taken after a holiday at my parents' house. Usually I spent the ride making excuses. Mom didn't mean it. She was just stressed. Let's give it time. This time I said none of those things. There was nothing left to explain away. Emily sat quietly beside me, staring through the windshield. The faint outline of my mother's hand was still visible on her cheek. Sophie had finally fallen asleep in the back seat, clutching her stuffed rabbit so tightly that its little ears stuck out between her fingers. I glanced at my wife. I'm sorry. She turned toward me slowly. For what? For every time I asked you to stay? Her eyes filled with tears again. Not because I had hurt her, because after 31 years, I had finally understood. We spent the next 2 days doing something we'd never imagined. We packed. Not because we had to leave our house. Our mortgage had been paid off years earlier. We packed because every corner of that home reminded us of a life built around pleasing people who had never truly accepted us. Boxes filled the living room, family photographs, Christmas decorations, old keepsakes. Emily carefully wrapped our wedding album in a blanket. She smiled at one of the pictures. We looked so young. We were. We thought love would solve everything. I smiled sadly. It solved the important things. She reached over and squeezed my hand. It did. On the third morning, I called a realtor I'd known for years. His name was Mike. He answered on the second ring. David, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. You sound serious. I need to sell my house. There was a long pause. I thought you loved that place. I do. But I don't love what it's connected to. Mike didn't ask questions. He simply said, I'll come by this afternoon. That's one thing I've always appreciated about good people. They don't demand explanations before offering help. The new place wasn't fancy. It was a modest ranch house about 40 minutes away in a quiet town where nobody knew my family's history. The backyard wasn't as big. The kitchen was smaller. The garage only fit one truck. But when Emily walked through the front door for the first time, she smiled. I can breathe here. That was all I needed to hear. Sometimes peace lives in places money could never buy. The first evening in the new house felt strangely unfamiliar. No perfectly decorated dining room. No expensive china. No family expectations. We ordered pizza because we hadn't unpacked the kitchen. Sophie declared it the best Christmas vacation ever. Emily laughed for the first time in days. You know why? Sophie nodded. Nobody yelled. Neither Emily nor I answered. There was nothing to add. Children often notice the truth before adults are willing to admit it. A week later, I sat down with every financial record we had. Over the years, I'd quietly helped my parents more than anyone realized. Dad's new pickup after his retirement, repairs on the lake house, their property taxes during a difficult year, even several medical bills Mom insisted she'd pay back someday. I had never kept score. Family wasn't supposed to keep score, but family also wasn't supposed to humiliate one another. I called the bank. I'd like to stop all automatic transfers effective immediately. The representative confirmed each payment, one by one. When the final transfer disappeared from the screen, I felt neither satisfaction nor anger, only relief. For decades, I'd confused obligation with love. They were never the same thing. That evening, Emily found me sitting on the back porch, watching the sunset over our new neighborhood. She slipped a blanket around my shoulders. Any regrets? I thought about my mother's house, the Christmas table, the slab. Then I looked through the window where Sophie was coloring happily at the kitchen table, humming Christmas songs to herself. I smiled. Only one. Emily looked concerned. What is it? I should have chosen you years ago. She leaned her head against my shoulder. You chose us now. For the first time in many years. That was enough. 3 days after we moved into our new house, my phone rang again. Mom? I stared at her name on the screen. Emily glanced over from the kitchen. You don't have to answer. For a moment, I considered letting it ring. But avoiding a conversation wasn't the same as ending one. I answered. Hello. Before I could say anything else, I heard sobbing. Real sobbing. Not the dramatic sighs my mother used whenever she wanted sympathy. She sounded exhausted. David, everything's falling apart. I waited. She had spent most of my life interrupting me. Now she could learn what silence felt like. Finally, she spoke again. Your father won't talk to me. That surprised me. Dad had spent 40 years swallowing his opinions to keep the peace. If he had stopped talking, something inside him had finally broken too. Mom took a shaky breath. Your sister blames me. I still said nothing. Linda says Christmas was ruined because of me. Another pause. Our pastor called yesterday. That caught my attention. What did he want? He heard about what happened. Of course he had. Our town wasn't large. News traveled faster than snowstorms. Someone had talked. Maybe my sister. Maybe one of the grandchildren. Maybe Dad. Whoever it was, the story had escaped the walls of my parents' dining room. And for the first time in her life, my mother couldn't control the narrative. She lowered her voice. People are asking questions. I looked out at our quiet backyard. A pair of cardinals landed on the fence. It amazed me how peaceful the world could be while someone's pride was falling apart. What kind of questions? They want to know if I really slapped Emily. I closed my eyes. And did you tell them the truth? She hesitated. I told them. Things got emotional. So you lied. I didn't lie. You just left out the part where you hit my wife. Her breathing became uneven. You don't understand how embarrassed I am. There it was again. Embarrassment, not regret, not remorse, not concern for Emily. Only concern for herself. Mom, my voice stayed calm. Have you called Emily? No. Why not? She sounded genuinely confused. Because I'm talking to you. No. I shook my head even though she couldn't see me. The person you owe an apology to isn't me. Silence filled the line. Then she whispered, I can't. Why? Because if I apologize, she stopped. If you apologize, then I'd have to admit I was wrong. For the first time, my mother had spoken with complete honesty. It wasn't hatred that had ruled her all these years. It was pride. The kind of pride that convinces people admitting they're wrong is somehow worse than hurting the people they love. That evening, Dad called. His voice sounded older than I remembered. Your mother doesn't know I called. I figured, he sighed. I should have stopped her. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. You tried. No. His answer came quickly. I stayed quiet. I leaned back in my chair. I always told myself silence kept the family together. He laughed bitterly. Turns out silence was destroying it. Those words settled deep inside me. Because they were true for both of us. Dad told me something I never expected. The night you left, he paused. Sophie left her little Christmas card on the table. The one that read, Merry Christmas, Grandma and Grandpa, love you. I found your mother holding it after everyone went home. I swallowed hard. What did she do? She cried. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to believe those tears meant something had changed. Another part remembered 30 years of promises that nothing ever would. Before hanging up, Dad said quietly, I don't know if your mother can fix this. I looked across the room. Emily and Sophie were putting ornaments into a storage box, laughing together. I don't know either, I admitted. But this time, I smiled softly. I'm not asking my family to pay the price while she figures it out. For the first time in my life, my mother's tears no longer decided what happened next. January settled it over central Ohio with bitter winds and long gray afternoons. For the first time in years, our weekends were quiet. No tense family dinners. No awkward phone calls. No wondering what careless remark might ruin the day. It felt strange. Then slowly, the phone started ringing again. Only this time it wasn't my mother. The first call came from my younger sister, Rachel. She had always been the peacemaker, the one who smiled through uncomfortable moments and changed the subject whenever Mom started criticizing someone. Can we meet? She asked. We met at a small diner halfway between our towns. Rachel looked exhausted. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug before speaking. I owe you an apology. I waited. I should have said something that night. I nodded. Yes, you should have. She looked down. I was afraid. Of Mom? Rachel gave a tiny smile. Haven't we all been? Neither of us laughed. Because it wasn't funny. It was simply true. She surprised me with what she said next. My oldest daughter asked me something after Christmas. What? Rachel swallowed. She asked why Grandma was allowed to hit Aunt Emily. My stomach tightened. I didn't know what to tell her. Children notice everything. They may not understand every detail, but they always remember how adults behave. Rachel rubbed her forehead. Then she asked if it would be okay for her to slap someone when she got angry. I closed my eyes. There it was. The reason I'd finally walked away. Cruelty doesn't stop with one generation. It gets passed down until someone decides it ends with them. Rachel reached across the table. You were right to leave. Those words meant more to me than she probably realized. A week later, another unexpected call came. This time it was Linda, the same sister-in-law who had mocked Emily over dinner. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello. Her voice sounded nothing like it had on Christmas. I've been thinking a lot. I didn't respond. I was trying to impress your mom. I know. I thought if she liked me, life would be easier. Did it work? She gave a sad little laugh. No. There was another long silence. You know what she called me yesterday? What? Selfish. Linda sighed. I've spent 15 years agreeing with her, and she still found a reason to tear me down. For the first time, she understood something Emily had lived with for 3 decades. Bullies eventually run out of new targets. Then they turn on the people standing beside them. I'm sorry, Linda whispered. I should never have joined in. I'll tell Emily. No, she said quickly. I'll tell her myself. That Sunday afternoon, Dad stopped by without calling first. He'd never done that before. He stood on our front porch holding a small cardboard box. I found these while cleaning the garage. Inside were Sophie's sled, an old baseball glove I'd used as a teenager, and a framed family picture from nearly 25 years ago. Dad smiled sadly. I figured they belonged with you. Emily invited him inside. At first, the conversation felt awkward. Then Sophie walked into the room. Grandpa, she ran over and hugged him without hesitation. Dad held her tightly. When he pulled away, his eyes were wet. I'm sorry, sweetheart. She looked confused. For what? He knelt beside her. For not protecting your mommy. The room became perfectly still. Emily reached for a tissue. Dad wiped his eyes. I should have stood up a long time ago. Emily walked over and gently squeezed his shoulder. You can't change 30 years. No, he nodded. But maybe I can change tomorrow. After Dad left, I sat on the back porch watching the sun disappear behind the trees. Emily joined me with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. Do you think people can really change? She looked toward the fading light. I think they can. She smiled softly. But only after they stop blaming everyone else. For the first time since Christmas, I began to believe our family wasn't just falling apart. It was finally waking up. By early spring, the snow had melted and the first hints of green had returned to the trees. Life had found a rhythm again. Emily had planted flowers along the front porch of our new house. Sophie had made new friends at school. For the first time in years, our home felt lighter. Not because our problems had disappeared, because we had stopped inviting them inside. Then one Thursday afternoon, Dad called. Your mother wants to see you. I leaned back in my chair. I don't think that's a good idea. I told her you'd probably say that. Then why are you asking? Dad hesitated. Because I think she's finally ready to listen. I had heard those words before. Too many times. Still, something in Dad's voice sounded different. Not hopeful. Careful. I agreed to one condition. We'll meet somewhere public. Dad didn't argue. The following Saturday, we met at a quiet park overlooking a small lake just outside Columbus. Emily came with me. So did Sophie. Not because I wanted them involved. Because I would never again leave them behind while I faced my family alone. Mom was already sitting on a park bench when we arrived. She looked smaller, not physically, emotionally. Her shoulders were slumped. Her hair, once perfectly styled, had been pulled back without much care. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut grass across the water. Finally, Mom stood. She looked at Emily, then lowered her eyes. I've practiced this speech all week. Nobody interrupted. But every version sounded like I was trying to defend myself. She swallowed hard. So I'll just tell the truth. She turned toward Emily. I was cruel to you. Emily remained silent. I told myself I was protecting my son. Mom's voice cracked. But I wasn't protecting anyone. She looked at me. I was protecting my pride. Those words hit me harder than I expected, because they were the first honest thing I'd ever heard my mother say about herself. She slowly walked toward Sophie, then stopped several feet away. I won't come any closer unless it's okay. Sophie looked at me. I nodded gently. Only if you want to. She stayed where she was. Mom smiled sadly. I understand. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded Christmas card. It was the one Sophie had made months earlier. The edges were worn from being opened so many times. I've carried this every day. She wiped away a tear. I kept reading the words. Merry Christmas, Grandma and Grandpa. Love you. I realized, her voice barely rose above a whisper, that I didn't deserve them. The park became completely still. Then Mom turned toward Emily. I'm sorry. Emily looked at her quietly. I don't mean... Mom shook her head. I don't mean I'm sorry you were hurt. She took a deep breath. I'm sorry because I chose to hurt you. Those 2 sentences made all the difference. She wasn't apologizing for the consequences. She was accepting responsibility for the choice. I judged you because you grew up poor. Tears rolled freely down her face. And I never noticed that you were richer than I was in all the ways that mattered. Emily's eyes filled with tears. But she didn't rush forward. She didn't hug my mother. She didn't pretend 31 years had disappeared. Instead, she answered gently, I accept your apology. Mom looked relieved. Then Emily continued, but forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. Mom nodded. I know. It will take time. I understand. And some things will never be the same. I know that too. For the first time in my life, my mother accepted boundaries without arguing. As we started walking back toward the parking lot, Sophie slipped her little hand into mine. Then after a few steps, she looked back. Grandma, Mom turned around. Yes, sweetheart. I hope next Christmas nobody yells. Mom covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. So do I. That was all. No dramatic promises, no magical ending. Just one little girl wishing for peace, and 4 adults finally understanding how much it was worth. Summer arrived quietly. The flowers Emily had planted along our front porch were in full bloom, and every Saturday morning she and Sophie watered them together before the heat settled in. I often watched from the porch with a cup of coffee in my hand. 6 months earlier, I couldn't remember the last peaceful Saturday we'd had. Now peace had become our routine instead of our dream. It still felt unfamiliar, but it also felt like home. One afternoon, Emily surprised me. "I invited your parents over." I nearly dropped my coffee mug. "You... what?" She smiled gently. "Not for dinner." I waited. "For dessert." I laughed. "There's a difference." "There is." She sat beside me on the porch swing. "Dinner keeps people trapped for hours. Dessert gives everyone an easy way to leave." That sounded exactly like Emily. Kind, but wise enough to protect her heart. When Saturday arrived, Dad pulled into the driveway first. Mom stepped out of the passenger seat slowly. She looked nervous. I had never seen my mother nervous before. She walked toward the porch carrying a small potted rosebush. "This is for your garden." Emily accepted it with a warm smile. "Thank you." Mom didn't try to hug her. She didn't force conversation. She simply followed our lead. That alone told me she had changed more than I realized. Inside the house, Sophie proudly showed Grandpa her latest school project. Dad listened as though it were the most important presentation he'd ever attended. Mom stayed quietly in the kitchen with Emily. I could hear dishes clinking as they sliced pie together. Not arguing, not pretending, just talking. Later, Emily told me what they had discussed. Nothing dramatic. Recipes, gardening, books. The ordinary conversations they'd never been able to have because pride had always filled the room before either of them could. Sometimes healing doesn't begin with grand speeches. Sometimes it begins by asking someone whether they'd like another cup of coffee. Before my parents left, Mom asked if she could speak with me alone. We walked into the backyard. She looked around at the flowers the swing set and the little vegetable garden Emily had started. "You've built a beautiful life." "We have." She nodded. "I spent years thinking success meant having the biggest house." She smiled sadly. "You have a smaller house than I do." I laughed. "I know. But somehow," she looked through the window where Emily and Sophie were laughing together, "it feels much bigger." I understood exactly what she meant. A home grows from love, not square footage. She took a slow breath. "I don't expect everything to go back to the way it was." "It won't." "I know." She looked relieved that I had answered honestly instead of politely. "I don't even want it to." That surprised me. The old way wasn't a family. She shook her head. It was everyone trying not to upset me. For the first time, my mother saw the truth as clearly as the rest of us. Control had never created respect. It had only created fear. When they drove away, Emily slipped her hand into mine. "I think she's trying." "I think so too." Emily smiled. "And if she keeps trying, we'll keep meeting her halfway." Not all the way. Halfway. Because forgiveness doesn't mean removing every boundary. Healthy families need both grace and accountability. One without the other eventually becomes unhealthy. That evening, Sophie climbed onto my lap while we watched the sunset from the porch. "Daddy." "Yeah, sweetheart. Grandma smiled a lot today." "She did." "I like this grandma better." I kissed the top of her head. "So do I." As I held my daughter close, I realized something that had taken me more than 60 years to learn. The greatest revenge isn't making someone suffer for what they did. It's building a life so full of peace, love, and self-respect that their cruelty no longer has a place to live. And that's exactly what we had finally begun to do. A year passed faster than I expected. Another December arrived, bringing cold mornings, fresh snow, and Christmas lights hanging from rooftops all over our little neighborhood. The difference was that this year nobody felt anxious when the calendar reached December 25th. For the first time in decades, Christmas wasn't something we had to survive. It was something we were actually looking forward to. We didn't gather at my parents' house. That chapter of our lives was over. Instead, everyone came to ours. It wasn't a large house. The dining room barely fit 10 people comfortably. The folding table Dad brought from his garage had to be set up beside the regular one. The chairs didn't match. The dishes weren't expensive. Emily joked that half the serving bowls had probably come from yard sales over the years. Nobody cared. The laughter filling the room was worth more than anything money could buy. Mom arrived early. Not to inspect the decorations, not to criticize the menu. She came because she wanted to help. Without being asked, she peeled potatoes beside Emily. The two of them laughed over an old recipe Dad's mother used to make. Watching them together felt almost unreal. Not because they had forgotten the past, because they had finally stopped letting it control every conversation. People can change, not quickly, not perfectly, but they can. Dinner began with something I'd never seen before. Mom stood and tapped her glass gently. I'd like to say something. The room became quiet. She looked at Emily first. Last Christmas, I used this table to tear my family apart. Her voice shook. This year, she smiled through tears. I want to use it to bring us back together. She turned toward Sophie. Sweetheart, our daughter looked up from her mashed potatoes. I'm still trying to become the grandmother you deserve. Sophie smiled the way only a child can. You already don't yell anymore. The entire table laughed. Even Mom, especially Mom. Sometimes children offer forgiveness long before adults believe they've earned it. After dinner, we exchanged simple gifts. Nothing extravagant. Dad gave me my grandfather's old pocket watch. I think it's time. I turned the worn silver watch over in my hand. It belonged to a man who believed family should leave each generation better than they found it. He looked toward Sophie. I think you're finally doing that. I couldn't speak. I simply hugged him. It was the first real hug we'd shared in years. Later that evening, Emily and I stood on the back porch while snow drifted softly across the yard. Inside, we could hear Sophie teaching Grandma how to play a board game. Mom kept losing. Sophie kept changing the rules so Grandma would have another chance. Emily slipped her arm through mine. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd stayed that night? I looked through the window. I do. What do you think? I smiled. I think Sophie would have learned that keeping the peace is more important than protecting the people you love. Emily nodded. And instead, I watched our daughter laughing without fear. She learned that love sometimes means walking away from the people you love most until they learn how to love you back with respect. That was the lesson I wished I'd learned decades earlier. But I was grateful Sophie wouldn't have to wait that long. Looking back now, I don't believe revenge was ever about making my mother cry. It wasn't about leaving. It wasn't about cutting off financial support. And it certainly wasn't about winning. Real revenge was refusing to let cruelty become my daughter's inheritance. Real victory was choosing dignity over silence. Setting boundaries didn't destroy our family. It saved the part of it worth saving. If this story touched your heart, I hope you'll take a moment to reflect on the people you love most. Never confuse peace with silence, and never mistake forgiveness for accepting mistreatment. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is protect your family with kindness, honesty, and healthy boundaries. And if you believe more stories like this can remind people that love and respect always belong together, please consider sharing this story with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe for more heartfelt journeys. The end.